Okay, so welcome to East Kirkby. Thank you very much for joining me here for the restoration talk. Just to get a bit of an idea, how many of you have been before to East Kirkby? Right. And how many of you have been to a restoration talk? And you're still coming back. Just checking. Make sure I'm saying the same things as we go along. Right, so thank you very much for joining me here. The purposes of these winter restoration tours really are to give you a bit of an idea of what we're doing for the restoration of the Lancaster going forwards to make it airworthy. So for those of you that are new to these and don't know what we're doing here really, this is our Lancaster NX611 and it's being restored to an airworthy condition which will make it the second airworthy Lancaster in the UK, the third airworthy Lancaster in the world. We did a paint strip of the aircraft and a full survey and assessment of it to work out the way ahead to restore the aircraft to airworthy. Our biggest problem is that we need to taxi the Lancaster in the summer to raise the money to spend on it in the winter and throughout the year to restore it to airworthy. So we're in a little bit of a catch-22 position here. We need to taxi the aircraft to raise the money, but we need to have the aircraft offline to do the restoration work. So we did the survey when we did the paint strip, which enabled us to create a little bit of a plan for 10 years for the project to restore it to airworthy. We decided from the survey that the parts needed to be hit first were the wooden parts, so the fins on the aircraft which have a wooden leading edge, the rudders and the wingtips which have a wooden leading edge as well. So those are what we did in the first 3 years of the restoration work. We're now in, or just starting year 5 of the 10-year plan, and a couple of years ago we decided if we're going to make this work taxiing and restoring, then really we've got to hit this in a slightly different manner. So we decided to look at ways that we could continue to taxi the aircraft and also make progress in the restoration. So we needed donor bits to put on the aircraft to taxi in the summer while we took our piece off, restored it to airworthy and swapped it back. The first opportunity came with the rear fuselage. So this winter we fitted the rear fuselage of KB976, which is a Canadian-built Lancaster, which we've borrowed from the South Yorkshire Air Museum. When it came to us, it unfortunately had a hanger collapse on it. Very unfortunate really. So this is what it looked like when it came to us, and I'll pass this round. So this was a Lancaster that was owned by a gentleman called Charles Church, and it was in a hangar at, I think it was at Woodford, being restored to airworthy condition. It was going through a major overhaul. And at that point they were doing stress analysis on the roof of the hangar, and the hangar collapsed during the tests, and it broke the back of the Lancaster. So as you look at NX611 here, look forward of the door, so that kind of 6 feet encompassing the door and just forward of it is where the beam of the hangar roof went through the aircraft, as well as a little bit further up as well. So you'll see from the photo there are a number of formers missing. Now formers are the piece that make the shape of the aircraft. So they kind of cross-section in that way going forward. So there's a series of formers and then stringers which interlock the formers together. So a great number of those formers were destroyed due to the hangar roof collapse. That part of the aircraft itself was scrapped and replaced with a piece from another aircraft, and the majority of that Lancaster now sits in containers with Kermit Weeks at Fantasy of Flight in Florida. But this piece was left in the UK on the scrap pile, so to speak. It exchanged hands a few times and then ended up at the South Yorkshire Air Museum, which is where we borrowed it from. During its more recent life, it was used for a docudrama called Night Flight. And so the prop company that sourced the aircraft and provided it to the BBC wrapped it in aluminium to recreate its structure from the outside, and they kind of put some part formers inside to make it look right. Of course, although it looks right for filming, it's not actually right. So when that piece came to us, we had to strip off all the broken pieces, all the bits that couldn't be used by us going forwards to make it to a good static come taxiing condition. So what you can see in the photo is a lot of the ribs, formers removed from that piece of fuselage, ready for us to rebuild it back to a proper Lancaster with all the correct parts. To produce the parts for that, we 3D scanned all of the formers within NX611's rear fuselage. From those scans we produced CAD drawings. From those CAD drawings we had wooden formers produced, and from those wooden formers we produced the correct metal forms to create the formers within the fuselage. So the formers were replaced and the stringers were replaced where they needed to be, and then of course we had new skins around the outside, all riveted back together to produce the KB976 rear fuselage that we have here. So quite a substantial proportion of this rear fuselage is new. Some of it is NX611. So the ring here, the steel ring, is an item that we replaced on NX611 due to corrosion. And when you look at this, you'll see the corrosion pitting within this steel ring. And then these two rearmost formed skins are also NX611 as well. There's a few pieces on this rear fuselage that we've had to fit from NX611 to KB976 to enable us to taxi with it this coming season. Then it'll be swapped back to NX611 when we refit NX611's rear fuselage. Some of those pieces you'll just about to see within the rear section. There's two cast pieces, forged pieces on the rear frame here, and also some tubular structure going forwards. So KB976 didn't have that when it arrived with us. It had those pieces robbed, as well as some other more substantial pieces within it as well. So it's got some donor pieces from NX611 which will go back onto NX611. But the majority of what you see here, minus the tailplanes, will be what actually goes back to the South Yorkshire Air Museum, and they'll receive back as a thank you for letting us to use the rear fuselage. People ask, why is it really worth spending money on somebody else's rear fuselage rather than stopping hours from taxiing and spending it on hours alone? And we've done the numbers and we've worked out that the revenue created by taxiing the aircraft for that season far outweighs the physical cost of doing somebody else's rear fuselage. If we were to take our rear fuselage off, stop taxiing and restore it, we instantly lose at least a year of taxiing. So that's not only the revenue created by people going on the taxi ride, it's also the revenue created by people coming through the door, paying their admission, having a tea or coffee in a naffy, and just spending the day with us while the aircraft taxis. So it would be a huge drop in revenue for the centre, and it would potentially mean that we couldn't actually do the project at all. So this is seen and deemed to be the best way forward at the moment. So as the aircraft sits at the moment, we've got the rear fuselage of KB976 to just forward of the rear door there, so just aft of the D, or on the other side it'll be just aft of the H. We have the NX611's rear tailplane fitted. The next parts to go on will be the fins and rudders and the elevator, which are in the egg boxes down there. The aircraft will then receive its tail oleo. So we at the centre have got three tail oleos. There's the original one out of NX611. There's one that we purchased from Australia a few months ago. Well, actually pre-COVID now, that's gone quick, a few years ago. And then there's one that we picked up from a relatively local collector probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And the plan with those is we're going to strip them all apart, use all the airworthy parts out of them to build up an airworthy oleo, and then we're going to build up a taxiing oleo to fit to NX611, and that will be done over the next few years. So where we are with the oleos at the moment, so the oleo is the suspension damper that the wheel fits to before it fits to the fuselage. So it's got a bit like a shock absorber on your car. It's an oil and air absorber, so there's a chrome fescalized portion which fits within an aluminium sleeve, and that produces the damping effect. There's kind of a piston in there with oil and air, very much like a shock absorber on your car, and that is the rear suspension of the aircraft. So that's completely broken down. So the one off NX611 is broken down and being surveyed. The one from Australia is also being surveyed, and then the earlier one which we purchased is currently in engineering, and I can show you that when we go down there. What I propose to do here is a two-piece talk, so one up here and then one down the restoration area as well. So we'll do this one first, and if you are not completely bored to tears with me, then you can follow me down to the bottom. If you want to leave at any point, please do. I will not be offended, but your card will be marked. So the oleo's out, being taken apart and surveyed. It'll likely have all the seals replaced because they're rubber seals within it, and those are likely to be completely duffed before we build them back up again, and then it'll be refitted. KB976 had its original, what you'd call it really, it's kind of a structure within the structure which holds the tail oleo. So that was came with KB976. The problem we found, it had a really hard landing at some point and really distorted that structure. So what we've had to do is, once we've built it all back up and placed it here, we've had to trial fit the tail oleo to make sure everything still lines up. Because the tail oleo goes up within a slot, and then there's a huge pin that goes through between the structure of the aircraft and a casting on the tail oleo. So all of that's got to line up perfectly, and of course it's not sloppy in the hole, so it has to be absolutely perfect as it goes through. Then the top of the oleo is held within the tailplane itself. There's a thick plate with a bush inside which holds the top pin of the oleo. So all of that had to line up before we were comfortable enough to take apart our oleo and service it and get it ready to refit. So we've had the tailplanes fitted to check all that, make sure all that fits, and then the oleo's gone to be taken apart. Next week should see, hopefully, a lot more of the structure built back up, so the fins, rudders, tail elevators, built back up, ready to receive the oleo so that she can go back down on her wheels. What we have here is an FN82 tail turret. So this is the original tail turret out of NX611. NX611 is a Mark 7 Lancaster, so it's fitted with an FN82 tail turret. The main difference being that this has got 2.5 Brownings rather than 4 303 Brownings. So it's got a lot better firepower, a lot further range. The reason these came in really is because it was getting towards the end of the war and we were doing more daytime operations, so we could afford the better firepower at greater distance, because obviously you can see a further distance in daytime. The earlier Lancasters had 4 303s, so you've got a more concentrated firepower at a closer distance, although it is like throwing peas at it. So this has been through a restoration with our turret man, who's a chap called Aid Harris. So he did an FN150 for us, which is the mid-upper turret, and then he took this FN82 away. And while this was away being restored, we had a turret fitted, which was on loan from the Yorkshire Air Museum up at Elvington, which was an FN121. And that should still be underneath the starboard wing of the B25, and you go down that way. So that FN121 will go back to the Yorkshire Air Museum, and we'll be refitting this FN82 very shortly inside the rear of the aircraft there. The good thing is, because that rear ring originally came from NX611, we know, in theory, we know that the turret will fit the ring. Fingers crossed, touch wood, and all that. So that's where we are with KB976 stroke NX611 at the moment. We should be taxiing the 2023 season with KB976 fitted, which should then give us about 10 months, 11 months to restore NX611's rear fuselage in the jig, to hopefully refit next winter. Next winter, in theory, is going to be extremely busy, and we will probably get nothing more done than the exchanging of parts. So in theory, provided everything goes to plan, KB976 will come off, NX611 rear fuselage will go on, the port wing of NX611 will come off, the port wing of NX664 will go on, the nose of NX611 will come off, and the nose of W21 will be fitted, provided everything goes to plan. So the biggest parts we've removed at any one point is the rear fuselage, and that's a ring of 240 bolts. So they basically go in the ring around the final former of the rear fuselage, called a transport joint. So there's a reinforced thicker former at the rear of the mid fuselage and the front of the rear fuselage, and they come together and you put a ring of bolts in. So it's very pleasing to us to offer up KB976 and all 240 bolts go in. When you consider that transport joint had a hanger girder fall on top of it, and it did distort the shape. So we had to make that shape correct again, make it fit our jig, and then put all new formers in from that transport joint back as far as the door. And all of that lined up and went in, I'm not going to say perfectly, but went in. So those bolts have been put back in, it's been lowered back onto the lower tail trestle, ready for the oleo to fit, and it will taxi out in the 2023 season. What I'm going to let you all do is, you're more than welcome to stick your head up inside the rear door of NX611 come KB976 and have a look inside that rear fuselage and see what's been done. It's received the master compass framework, which is the yellow framework above your right shoulder as you look through the door. That's out of NX611, as is the flare chute, which is directly in front of you as you look in the door. And various little bits and pieces are off NX611 just to refit it, so that if you have a taxi ride in 2023, you're not just in a tin can, it's actually been refurnished with items. So by all means, go around and have a look up the steps and inside, what are we going to call it? KB611 we'll call it. Poke your head in and have a look up. You'll also see up towards the front as well. So by all means, start that process if you want to go and have a look. I'll shout a bit louder so you can still hear me. One of the items left to go on is the Perspex cupola for the H2S radar. So if you look up the aircraft, you'll see the big Perspex blister on the floor of the hangar. That just needs offering up, because that bridges the gap between rear fuselage and mid fuselage, and that's where the scanner fits in. The scanner itself is down in engineering at the moment, and that's being serviced and looked at to get it operating. So you can put wires to the motor and make it rotate. That we found doesn't quite fit the rear fuselage at KB976. It just needs some extra tacking to go on, which Dave is doing this next week. And then we'll be able to hold the Perspex cupola back on the fuselage, and it'll look just as it did before we rolled it in winter. Yeah. The rear turret here has had all of the Perspex replaced. It's come apart in it's tiny little sections, tiny little items to be built back up again. We actually also bought a second FN82, or majority of a second FN82 turret, which did give us some donor parts which we were missing from this turret itself. So we have built it back up exactly as it would have been as it rolled out of the factory. It's a Mark II FN82 turret. It's got some modifications to it, like the moving of the oxygen economizer, which sits just up in here, and the removing of some of the items inside, a slightly different seat as well, and a slightly different radar setup. So there's an awful lot to learn about individual components on the aircraft and deciding what mod state to take them to. The spare FN82 that we purchased has also been restored, and that's in the air gunners display over the other side of the museum. So you can see both the Mark I and the Mark II FN82 turrets.
The round what's going to be in here, are they like them ones where like the actual, or are they like original NX611?
Yeah, so they're the originals from NX611 and the activated. Yeah. So the Browning, the .5 Brownings that were fitted to this turret all go back into it, and they followed the aircraft all the way through its life. So while the aircraft was stood at Scampton, those Brownings were taken out and put into the guardhouse or whatever it was at Scampton, because during that period there was all the troubles with the IRA, and it was considered that they were dangerous having those original .5 Brownings in the aircraft sat at the gate at Scampton. So they were removed and dummies were put in. We have the dummies, which are in the FN82 spare turret over there, and this turret will receive the original Brownings fitted to NX611 originally. So the turret is hydraulically operated, and then a Mark VII Lancaster had a radar system underneath. So there's a radar dish that stuck out just underneath the turret here, and so it's a system called AGLT. So it's automatic gun laying tracking, or something like that is what it stands for, and that's a radar guided system that aids the gunner to see a target that's coming towards it. It's kind of linked in with a system called IFF as well, which is identity fend or throw, something like that.
Yeah.
So if you look at NX611's nose blister, there's two circles on it, and those are infrared lamps which give out infrared, which is then received by the rear turret, and dictates if they're on, it sees it as a friendly aircraft rather than being an enemy aircraft.
Considering the age, it's quite...
Yeah, when you consider what we were like at the start of the Second World War to how we progressed towards the end of it, you would never have expected there to be the first ground mapping radar and radar guided turrets on the aircraft as well. So over the next year we're going to be restoring NX611's rear fuselage to airworthy while this one's fitted. We will also be receiving we'll call it the bomb aimers section, so cockpit canopy come control panel forwards where the bomb aimer lays down where the front turret is. That section will be coming over from France. The same aircraft as has donated the wings, and that will be coming over for us to restore to a static taxiing condition, and that will be swapped over next winter. And we will also in the next coming months be receiving the mid section from NX664 as well. So that's from the D up to the wing effectively, so it holds the start of the bomb bay and it holds the turret as well. So the same arrangement there as with the wings, although they've already restored those sections. So the nose section and the mid fuselage section coming over from France, we will have a look at them, make sure they're okay, paint them in Bomber Command scheme, and then they'll be swapped out with NX611 so we can restore our sections to airworthy, swap them back again. What we plan to do with the aircraft is so that everyone knows which bit is which, it will all be marked on it which aircraft it's come from. So here, where we would normally have the NX611 serial number, we will have NX611 and we will also have KB976. So that in the coming years, in 10 years time for example, when somebody who's not read the full story on the internet says, you know, it's not really NX611, half of it's KB976, we can say, well, it was at one point, and that's when it had KB976 fitted to it and written on it, but now it's all NX611. We plan for the port wing, when we fit the port wing of NX664, late war and after war, Lancaster's had the serial number printed on the underside of the wing. So we will have NX664 printed underneath the wing as it would have been late war time into the 50s, and that's a throw to it being NX664 fitted. I'm not sure what we're going to do for the other bits because they wouldn't have had NX664 written on them or anything like that, but we're going to make it very obvious as we're going through the aircraft which piece is fitted where, so that everybody knows when it is back to completely NX611. So we're 5 years into the 10-year restoration plan. The hardest, biggest parts for us are going to be the cockpit and the centre section. The centre section encompasses basically the main spar section as far as the just outboard of the inboard engines. So as you look back at the wing, you'll see the panel sitting up on the leading edge. You can just see the propeller from the inboard engine, and then you see how the wing kicks up. So it's where the wing starts to kick up, that's where the outer wing meets the centre section. So when we come to do the centre section of the Lancaster, we have basically the inboard engine all the way through the fuselage, all the way to the outboard of the outboard engine. That is all one section. And so that's going to be kind of the most complex part because it has obviously the spars through it, it has the systems running through it, and the flying controls run all through it as well. Not only that, it also has the bomb bay section within it. So as you walk around the Lanc, if you look up inside the bomb bay, you'll see a particularly intricate section of intercostals and ribs all running through it. So to paint, strip and repair and repaint those, it's a huge job just in that bomb bay section alone. And of course that's kind of one of the strongest parts of the aircraft because that's where a lot of the weight is hung from.
Will you need new engines, or will these engines be airworthy potentially?
So the 4 engines fitted to at the moment are to taxiing. Number 4 was airworthy, but we've been taxiing with it for a few years now. We have 5 airworthy engines in total. The other ones are in stores, bonded store, waiting to go. So over the next few years you'll begin to see us building up power plants. So power plant is engine, radiator, all cooler, engine bearers, and all the pipe work and everything that sits around the engine. The beauty of doing this talk in winter is you can go and have a look at an engine now, see all the cowlings off and see all the pipe work and everything around it. So we have what they call power plant stands, and those power plant stands take engine bearers for the engine. You can sit the engine in it, build the power plant up on that stand. So over the next few years you'll see us start to do that with the airworthy engines. We've currently got 2 oil coolers airworthy, ready to fit to power plants. We've got 2 coolant radiators going through rebuild at the moment, being recored for airworthy as well. So we can then start to build up 2 power plants to fit to the Lanc. The power plants are very similar whether it's inboard engine or outboard engine. There's just a few services fitted differently, like generators, compressors, depending on which position you put them within the aircraft. We also have 2 engines worth of spare cowlings, so they're the metal pieces that wrap around the engines. So we're going to look at cycling those through the Lanc to take hours off, restore them, refit them in a similar way as we're doing fuselage sections as well.
NX611 wing, if you get it completed May or June, would you change it over then, or will you wait till next November?
We're going to have to wait till November. Our biggest concern with the wings is where the wing kicks up, there's something called a fillet panel, a closure panel. So you see like almost a creased piece as you look at the wing there. So that's what they call a closure panel. That's held on by I think it's 2BA screws. When you take those off, there's 4 big bolts, 2 at the front, 2 at the back, and those are steel bolts within a steel plate. And our biggest concern is what if we can't get those out? So taking the wing off is a massive project. It hasn't been done since this aircraft was moved, or since PA474 at Coningsby had its rear spar replaced. But there's the big 4 bolts to take out, as well as some bolts that run in the web between those big bolts. So the whole wing, the lank will be lowered right down to pretty much ground level. So it'll have the undercarriage bent back up and within the nacelle, lowered down to ground level. The wing itself has got to be trestled. You've got to take the trailing edge off the main plane, and then we've got to start, so you've got engine off, got to start undoing those bolts, and we just don't know if they're going to come out or not. They haven't been removed since they were put in 1988, and of course they're steel on steel, so that the chance of rust and corrosion is very high with those. So a big hammer, yeah. If it isn't moving, get a bigger hammer. Yeah, so there's going to be obviously penetrative fluid applied, there'll be heat applied, and we'll just see where we get with it. So the first thing we will do before we take anything else off the aircraft next winter is get up there, put some penetrating oil on those bolts and just see if they move. If they don't move, they'll move. We don't want to think about them not moving. But yeah, what we don't want to do is get everything else stripped down, ready to take the wing off, and find we can't get those bolts out. So that's the biggest fear. But to do that, of course, we need a good period of time to be working on it.
Is it all your own engineers that you have working on it, or have you got other people coming in, say from Coningsby or?
No, it's all our own. So we've got a team of, did work it out the other day, I think it's about 6 full-time engineers plus additions of volunteers as well. So they're paid engineers plus volunteers, and they're working on different projects depending on what's going on with the aircraft. From BBMF we get help with drawings, manuals, things like that. We have a meeting with the project team there each year. They tell us what they're doing, we tell them what we're doing, we exchange ideas. We'll join production runs if we can. BBMF haven't been through their Lancaster as deep as we're going through this one, so we're finding things all the time which we're updating the Battle of Britain flight with, and say, it'd be a good idea if you have a look at that because this is what we found. So it's a really good, it's the best relationship we've ever had with the Battle of Britain flight over the last 40 odd years, and it's getting better and better. So I think they're finding it quite useful coming and seeing, because they've never seen a wing strip down, for example, so they're coming and seeing the wing strip down, see how it's made, see how it's all put together, and then get worried about theirs because they realise it's 4 bolts that hold it on, things like that. Yeah, so they've been very good with us, a very good working relationship with them, but we don't share manpower, unfortunately.
Do you think you'll get this flying while the other one is still flying?
Hopefully. I mean, they're on I think it's a rolling 30-year expectation when they're going to stop flying. What will limit it for them will be fuel, I'd imagine, or if they just deem there's not the engineering ability to keep it flying going forwards, then they'll likely ground it. It's their decision, of course. Depends what the RAF decide to do in the future with their heritage, doesn't it? It's all it's a cost for no strategic gain, I guess, in one respect. What would stop this flying would be insurance and fuel. If you can't get the insurance for it, then legally you can't fly it. But,
are you able to take off from here?
Yeah, so East Kirkby, old RAF East Kirkby, we have enough area for a 6,000 feet runway. So that's down the original line of the main runway of RAF East Kirkby. We don't have it at the moment, but the length is still there to be able to implement. Yeah, grass strip, yeah. Lancaster's...
Parallel to the wood?
Sorry?
Will that run parallel to the wood?
Kind of, yeah.
The wood's in the middle of the runway one, isn't it? More or less.
Yeah, kind of. So if you look out and look at our grass strip, you'll see there's a hedgerow that runs the far side of the strip. If you follow that all the way up to the left, there's a little copse of trees, and just offset from that is where the original main runway was. So it'll be down that line there, on grass. And Lancaster's originally operated off grass. Downbusters, for example, took off on grass and all that. So more than capable of doing it.
What's the issue with fuel?
So the fuel is are they going to still make it? So they're pushing for electric vehicles if that ever takes off. I suspect will be more likely hydrogen, something like that. will there be enough coal to actually refine avgas in the future when more modern aircraft are using Jet A1 fuels? I don't know.
I convert it to red diesel.
Yeah. I mean, I suspect we will either get down the line of actually there's a modification to run them on hydrogen fuel cells, something like that. You never know. Or there will just be some sort of avgas type fuel refined from plants or something, some sort of biofuel that will be used for vintage vehicles, vintage aircraft, that kind of thing. Will remain to be seen. It's a long way down the line yet.
Andrew, are you making the turrets operable, movable, or will they be fixed?
So we'll likely put in all the hydraulics to it, but we're not going to get them operable in the short term, purely because it's another system to have to maintain while we're not using it. So it may well be that we do eventually link up hydraulics to them. I mean, this, for example, hasn't been restored to an hydraulically operating condition. It would need all the rams rechroming and that kind of thing. But it's possible for the future, even if it's a system where you fit an outdoor hydraulic rig to it so you can demonstrate it rather than have it running in flight. Right, I'm going to go down that way. If you choose to follow me, you're more than welcome to, and I shall talk about the bits down there. I'll also field questions down there as well if anyone's got any particular questions.